Haunted hotel. As I walked into the old hotel, shivers ran down my spine. The grandeur and history of the place were palpable, but there was a distinct eeriness that I couldn't quite pinpoint. I was led to the lobby, where I was greeted by the manager, a tall man with a stern face. He briefly went over my responsibilities and expectations before handing me a small booklet. It was an employee handbook, but something about it felt off. It was written in a hectic style, with bold words peppered throughout. "Read this cover to cover," the manager instructed before leaving me alone in the lobby. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed that each rule was more bizarre than the last. Rules such as never staying in the hotel after work hours or never leaving my cell phone behind were understandable. However, some seemed like they didn't adhere to the real world. But, with no other job prospects, I decided to stick it out. For my first day, I had to undergo some additional training, so I was called into the manager's office. He was wearing a pensive expression as though he wished he could switch places with me, and it was then that I realized that I might have bitten off more than I could chew. The unspoken feelings of the manager were magnified when he introduced me to the real employee handbook. The manager informed me that some of his words might be unsettling, but he needed to ensure my safety. He handed me a laminated sheet, and it was then that I saw the 10 rules. I skimmed the list, and my mouth went dry. Rule number 1 was to never stay in the hotel after work hours. Rule number 2 was to always keep my cell phone with me at all times. There were some logical rules as well, such as not entering any guest rooms not assigned to me, but they were mixed in with more questionable ones, such as to not look into mirrors after midnight. The manager's demeanor made it clear that I wasn't to question these rules. Despite the ominous rules, I was running on adrenaline and had made it through the day. It wasn't until my first night shift when things began to get strange. It was around midnight when I heard it. There were no guests on my floor, and I'd already finished cleaning all the rooms. But I heard something, faint at first, but it grew louder with every passing moment. I made out the sound of someone banging on a guest room's door, and immediately, I sprinted towards the sound. But, as soon as I reached for the doorknob, the banging stopped. I thought maybe it was a prank, but I had already glanced at my watch, and the time was 2:09 a.m. A feeling of unease consumed me as I returned to my cleaning cart, and I couldn't shake it off, even as I left the hotel that morning. The next day, I nervously approached the manager's office, scared to report any discrepancies. But, as we sat down and began discussing my first night, I sensed a shift in the supervisor's manner. He was more frigid than before, as if he didn't want me to reveal anything out of the ordinary. And when I hesitantly broached the topic of the banging on the door, the manager said that it was probably just in my imagination. He then launched into the importance of the rules, emphasizing the need to always have my cell phone with me. Because if anything ever happened, my cell phone was my lifeline. Little did I know how crucial those words would prove to be. 2 days into the job, and I'd heard odd sounds and received strange looks, but I'd made it through it. However, that night when my cell phone began to ring, there was a type of seriousness to it that I could tell was not good. As I saw the number, it registered unknown. I hesitantly answered, but there was dead air. I repeated, asking if anyone was on the line. That's when I heard the sound of a strained, almost inhuman voice. "You should have followed the rules," the voice whispered. I bolted up from my bed, my throat clenched tight. Was someone watching me? Was someone in the hotel? But, most of all, who could have called me from a restricted number? The next morning, I spoke to the manager about the call, and once again, he reiterated that the rules were not to be questioned. But there was something in his demeanor that hinted that he knew more than what he was letting on. He then told me about the third rule, to never use the elevator alone. Apparently, there had been reports of strange occurrences happening in the elevator late at night. That night, I had to use the elevator to go up to the 10th floor. Everything seemed fine until the elevator suddenly stopped. I was trapped inside, and the lights went out. It took me a few moments to process what had happened. I was alone in a pitch-black elevator with nothing but my cell phone to light my way. The seconds turned into minutes, and I began to panic. I banged on the door but no sound came through. It was as if I was suspended in mid-air, in a vacuum. I could hear my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. It felt like something was watching me, and I could feel myself losing control. Suddenly, I heard someone whisper, "Follow the rules." It was then I remembered Rule 2, to always keep my cell phone with me, and that's when I heard a faint beep in my pocket. It had enough battery, and I held it up, using the light to keep the darkness at bay. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The cases of the strange events were growing increasingly noticeable every day. And when I asked the manager about the night before, he seemed more uneasy than ever. He told me about the fourth rule, to never enter a guest room without knocking first. Apparently, there had been reports of strange entities lodging themselves in some of the rooms. As my shift drew to a close that day, I could feel an undercurrent inside the building that was polarizing. It was as if the very air was charged with electricity, and I knew that I'd made the mistake of accepting this job. That night, as I was cleaning one of the rooms, I could hear soft whispers coming from the corner. I turned around to look, and the voices grew louder, growing more pronounced each second. As I approached the spot, a hand shot out, and I stumbled back. My cell phone dropped as I fell backward, somehow slipping under the bed. I scrambled to find it, but when I finally retrieved it, I could see murky shadows rising from within the room. Faint outlines of figures that were neither human nor natural. The last day of my job couldn't come any sooner. I was so close to making it out of there alive. But, as I walked towards the exit, the manager stopped me. And once again, his eyes revealed more than what he was letting on. He gave me the final rule, an all-encompassing guideline that had been there all along, to use my common sense. He then added that there was a reason why these rules were in place, a reason that would reveal itself to me eventually. And as I made it outside, heading towards the sunlight, the pressure subsided. The hauntings wouldn't follow me, at least that's what I hoped. I had survived, but even now, years later, the memories of the old hotel still haunt me.